This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, a licensed marriage and family therapist and a soul-led leadership coach to women in midlife who are wanting more meaning in the second half. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute, nor is it to convey professional, psychological, financial, or medical advice. If you could use such services, please seek them out from someone you trust. Episode 142. Hey, if you're liking what you're hearing, I really encourage you to go out to Apple Podcast and leave either a star rating, it's just a simple little click on the number of stars, or you can actually write a review. This really does help the algorithms and things like that from this podcast to be discovered more easily by other women around the world. So appreciate you listening. And now on my website, if you go out to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com and over on the podcast tab, if you click that, there's a little place where you can actually leave me a little audio message. So again, I'm the one that still checks all those things. You can actually leave me a message like what you like, what topics you want to continue to hear on the podcast, and so much more. Thank you so much for listening, and here is today's episode. Well, welcome, sisters. Oh, I'm so excited about this conversation. So my guest today is actually a returning one. I have Melody Wilding, who is a licensed social worker, executive coach, and author. She was on episode 7, where we discussed being ambitious, a highly sensitive person, and managing your emotions. Well, Melody has recently released her new book called Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking and Channel Your Emotions for Success at Work. Recently named one of Business Insider's most innovative coaches for her groundbreaking work on sensitive strivers, her clients include CEOs, C-level executives, and managers at top Fortune 500 companies such as Google, Hewlett-Packard, Facebook, Netflix, Twitter, and others. Melody has been featured on the New York Times, the Oprah magazine, NBC News, and spoken at Stanford University, Walmart, Adweek, Burberry, and more. She's here to help you break free from self-doubt and imposter syndrome so you can use your sensitivity as a superpower it is. Well, Melody, thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Well, my first question I often ask authors is like, why did you write this book? And I know this has been a culmination for you and some of the things you shared in our previous episode, but truly, why did you write this book?
Yeah. And I think I mentioned in our first episode how this book really came about because of my own professional and personal experiences. So having been someone who is a sensitive striver all my life, been very highly sensitive and have recognized that, maybe didn't have the terminology for it, but also very high achieving. And so those personal experiences, being someone who struggled with confidence and setting boundaries, burnout, everything that comes along when we don't understand or have tools to manage our sensitive qualities effectively. But then also now having coached for 10 years and having worked with sensitive strivers in leadership, management, professional positions, and seeing this same constellation of challenges that come from the intersection of sensitivity and ambition. And so I really wanted to create a guide to distill what I've been working on with clients for over 10 years, but make sure that it was very highly actionable. I didn't want this just to be another leadership or professional book that you read and say, oh, that was nice, that was interesting, but I'm not sure what to do now. I'm not sure how to apply this. And so I really saw a gap, not only to address sensitivity in the workplace, but also to make sure it was very concrete, that it read much more like a roadmap.
I love that. And ladies, before I hit record, I was just telling Melody just how much I appreciated her having, she's got prompts in the book, little worksheets in the book. And I know so often from my coaching clients, they often I love having, that structure or that being able to kind of do stuff in between sessions. And Melody's book definitely has those things. So I really love how you've incorporated that into your book. And okay, so let's back up for just a second, Melody. You have this term. You call the people that you basically work with the sensitive strivers. And I know you use that in the book. And I know many of my listeners can identify as being sensitive. But can you explain what that means and what are some of the most common challenges that they actually face in the workplace?
Sure. So sensitive strivers are people who are highly sensitive, but also very high achieving. So they think and feel everything more deeply, but they are also very career oriented, driven. They achieve high goals. They put a lot of pressure on themselves to succeed. So it's that combination of having the biological trait difference of sensitivity, being more attuned to your own emotions as well as those around you, but also being very ambitious in your career. And those two qualities being profoundly affected and just a deeper thinker and feeler with the ambition piece, especially when unbalanced, which I talk a lot about balancing our qualities because when they're balanced, they can be a tremendous strength. But when they're unbalanced, can lead to a lot of challenges like overthinking everything, taking feedback more personally, burning out, not setting boundaries in the workplace, self-doubt and imposter syndrome about our capabilities. So that's a few of the most common ones that I see.
Yeah. And I was giggling because I'm like, yeah, I have no idea what you mean by overthinking. Don't know what you mean.
Never.
You also share in the book, like one of the biggest hangovers you'll get in your life. It is not what like Brene Brown talks about, the vulnerability hangover. You call it the honor roll hangover.
Yes.
So what is that and how can the women listening avoid it?
Yes. And, I think the honor roll hangover is even more common among women. And I talk about this in the book that as sensitive women, in particular, as sensitive strivers specifically, we are groomed, we are conditioned from a very young age to want to do things correctly, check all the boxes, do everything right, and then you will be successful. And also, we create this almost addiction to achievement, to validation, to having other people tell us that you're good enough, you're smart enough, right? And so those same actions that lead us to be successful in the classroom, in college, once we get into our professional lives, start to hold us back because what got us here isn't going to get us there. And so specifically, the honor roll hangover is a combination of three things: perfectionism, people pleasing, and overfunctioning. So perfectionism, I'm sure many of us can relate to that, not necessarily striving for flawlessness, because most of us know intellectually that's not possible or achievable. But perfectionism, as I see it with sensitive strivers, tends to be the harsh self-criticism. No matter what you do, nothing is ever enough. Even if you work hard, you could have worked harder. That deliverable could have been better. So we are constantly striving for A pluses. And if we don't, or if we perceive we're not achieving them, then we assume we're a failure. And it also looks like rigidness around there being one right way to accomplish something. There's one right path to success or one right way to start and run your business. And that if we do something else, anything else is unacceptable.
Yeah.
So that's part one, perfectionism. You want me to pause there?
Nope. Keep going. Keep going.
Then we have people pleasing. Again, most of us probably well acquainted with this, which, we're natural helpers as sensitive strivers. We tend to love people. We're highly empathetic, but we can compromise ourselves. That desire for approval can become a dependency where we have such a strong desire for approval and validation from other people that we have low regard for our own opinions and judgments. We compromise what is most important to us, or we're like a chameleon. And so most of the time I see this come up as not being able to say no, taking on too much. And then that leads into overfunctioning, which is that sort of being a hero. I call it heroing your way through your work, where again, we're dependable, we're committed, we can always be counted on to follow through, but we are the one always fixing situations, rescuing other people, working late to push that project through or to cover for your team. And we assume so much responsibility that other people can underfunction. They don't have to perform, right? They cannot step up. They can constantly look to us for direction. And then we start feeling resentful because why can't anybody else pick up their end of the slack here?
Mm-hmm.
So that is our honor roll hangover: perfectionism, people pleasing, overfunctioning.
Well, and so much of what you're talking about too, when we don't actually regard ourselves, when we don't kind of have a healthy self-esteem, right? Or we're looking outside of ourselves for that validation. It's also saying as a manager, right, that we're not trusting our people that work
Yes.
for us. And we don't allow them then to rise up if we're doing more. Right? If you've given them tasks to do, delegated the work, and then trying to come in and kind of rescue because you're like, want to get that project through, you want to do this. It's like, but then how do they grow?
Right. Right. And often that's such a big mindset shift for people because sensitive strivers, often people who come to me tend to be in corporate. And so they come to me saying, well, I'm the one that provides air cover for my team. My job is to protect them from politics and all of those demands that are coming up. But exactly as you said, you're depriving them of growth opportunities. If you think about your own career, many of the best managers you probably had were ones that gave you stretch assignments, that allowed you to step in and sit in on meetings instead of them. And so that's a really big mindset shift to see that as actually you giving people the opportunity to step up and take on tasks is actually in service of them.
And if they make mistakes, if something doesn't work out, it's being able to debrief that, right? And saying like, what did work? What didn't work? What could you do differently next time? Again, that's all about the growth. It's all about, yes, and empowering them, because then you also empower yourself as that leader.
100%.
Love it. Well, let's kind of shift then a little bit, talking about the emotions. And you have a beautiful quote in there by Amber Ray, who says, our feelings aren't the problem, it's the relationship to them. And so emotions have traditionally has been something, especially for women, really to hide at work, not talk about. But you talk about this quite a bit in the book, and how our sensitivity can be an asset, but how we can turn that emotionality, because again, like you said, we're deep feelers, we're deep thinkers, how we can turn that into a competitive advantage at the work, at the job.
Yeah. When I was doing the research for this book, of course, I always intuitively sense, as someone who's sensitive, that our emotions work for us. But looking at the research, when I did the book, there were stats like 90% of top performers are high in emotional intelligence. 92% of executives rate soft skills, like the ability to manage your emotions, as a critical priority. And so it's really remarkable that the very thing we undermine about ourselves is one of the most important things that makes us more effective. And so really, as sensitive strivers, when that quality of emotionality is well balanced, we get to experience the upsides of being highly empathetic, being able to motivate your team, boost morale. But also, when I work with clients, another big reframe for them is recognizing that this aspect of emotionality is what makes you effective at persuading and influencing people.
Yes.
Because you can understand their pain points, right? You can enter their experience. You can craft a persuasive, a convincing argument to take a certain direction. You can inspire and motivate people because you're able to tap into those emotions. And so that is exactly how I think we need to rethink that our emotions are a burden. Of course, we need to manage them. And you can't have emotional intelligence without emotion regulation, which I have an entire chapter on in the book. But rather than, our actions follow our thoughts. And so if we are thinking, oh, I'm just so emotional, that is what's holding me back in our career, we're not going to act on and express those strengths. So I think it's really fundamental that we start to shift that limiting mindset to say, you know what, this is actually what does make me intuitive. I am better equipped at using my emotions as a signal to guide my decision making, to understand other people, to make more informed judgments.
Oh, I love that. It is. It's so much instead of we're all emotional human beings, instead of making those things as a detriment, and again, being tuned in like we often are, it's make that the strength. And like you're saying too, and like I've talked about in different podcast episodes, emotional regulation is key. Instead of us being driven by the emotion that can be like so intense, it's like, okay, what's it informing me of? And yeah, connecting with your staff or others within your organization. It's such an asset. So don't make yourself wrong because you experience these things. It's like, wow, this is a gift and I know what to do with it instead.
Exactly.
I love it. Well, okay, then this goes into kind of the next question too. We women at the office also know that if we say no at work, it's going to end up hurting our careers. So you talked a little bit earlier in the conversation about, having some of these boundaries and things where we know where we kind of start and stop, and then trusting our staff and things like that. So how can women really navigate using no without excessively worrying, I'll say, that it's going to actually negatively impact their career?
Yeah. And this is more important than ever before when, especially women, are shouldering so much more demands and the burden of work and home life. We have to be that much more diligent about prioritizing and protecting our time. And so, what I would first say is that whenever you are saying no, wherever possible, try to come with an alternative proposal or solution at the ready. For example, if your boss asks you for a last minute report, you may say, it's not possible for me to deliver the entire report by Friday. What I can do is give you the first part and we can take it from there. How does that sound? So if you are coming with a alternative proposal, a workable compromise, it positions you as someone who is a team player, as someone who knows how to prioritize and think critically and problem solve, which is what your manager is looking for. And it's interesting because oftentimes when I work with women in private coaching or in my programs, again, this is another shift to realize that if you never say no, if you are just the endless kind of person who just, keep putting things on my plate because you want to appear as the team player, senior leadership is going to look at you and say, she doesn't know how to prioritize. She's already so she has so much on her plate already. We're not going to give her more. So being able to push back and say no and say, actually, another way to do this is to say, okay, I'm happy to get that done. What would you like me to deprioritize as a result? So pushing it back on them shows you have those leadership skills to be effective at a higher level.
Love that. I can't tell you how many times I have spoken with women who are like, yes, I've got so many things on my plate and I just don't know how to prioritize that. And I'm like, well, have you talked about that with your supervisor, your manager? Well, no. I'm like, well, that's great. You're very qualified. You can do all of these things. At the same time, though, you're literally burning yourself out. You're driving yourself into the ground and they can't do anything about it if they don't know that.
Exactly.
And if this is kind of like a newer position, like they've stretched you in a sense, like they've kind of added more responsibility to what you're doing. If you don't give them feedback, they're not going to know what is working and what is not. And it's okay to not know how to prioritize if something is different or new. You've got a brand new project, whatever it may be, asking like what you're saying, like, okay, what I can do this or I can do this, but I'm kind of not sure. What do you want me to have the most priority, first, so we can go from there? Love it.
Exactly. That's perfect.
Yeah. All right. So since we're talking about some stress and managing boundaries and all that good stuff, and I know as HSPs that oftentimes that criticism piece comes at such a high avoidance strategy that people are like so worried about feedback, but we all need feedback in life. So how do sensitive strivers really navigate stressful workplaces where they are getting feedback or criticism or dealing with like the difficult coworker or trying to manage up? How do they end up navigating that where they don't truly burn themselves out or doubt themselves so incredibly much, they just avoid it at all costs.
Well, I think you bring up a very important point right there about approach versus avoidance,
Yes.
where what I see with avoidance happen is that the more you shy away from feedback, you don't ask for it, the scarier it becomes to get it. And the more the fear builds within you. So making feedback a regular part of your process. For example, many times when I'm coaching clients, they will have one-on-one with their manager a month that is entirely devoted to professional development.
Oh,
What am I
beautiful.
doing well? Where do I need to improve? Right. And we're talking about competencies, skills, your performance, not just, our tasks on track. So that can be very helpful as well. Doing something where with each project you have, building in a debrief at the end. So there's an opportunity to say, how did we work together? Again, what can we improve for next time? What was effective here? What do we want to change? So you have those opportunities to get feedback in a planned way. When you feel in control of getting the feedback, it's much more, and there's research to show this, that we're much more receptive to it and we're much less fearful of it because we have sought it out rather than it being something that is thrust upon us. So that is first and foremost, is really making it a regular part of your process, making it a system wherever possible.
Oh, love that.
Yeah. Second, I would say is internal boundaries. We talk a lot about external boundaries. How do I set limits around my time or disconnecting from work, getting up from your desk for certain times a day. But we don't talk enough about internal boundaries, which is how much do we allow something to take up mental and emotional space inside us? And with feedback, sensitive strivers can ruminate on that for days, right? We can get one negative comment, and that is what sticks with us for the rest of the week and ruins our mood. So we need ways to set those stronger internal boundaries so that it doesn't balloon in our heads. One way to do that is through some positive visualization. So when you are receiving feedback or about to get it, I share a few techniques in the book. I have one colleague who imagines painting herself in gold armor. So that's like her suiting up, her Beyonce suit. And that is her way of kind of protecting herself, shielding herself from whatever is going to come next. She knows she's a rock star no matter what. I have other clients who imagine sort of a glass pane between them and the other person, so they're not so spongy when those comments come in. So those types of visualization techniques can be priming your brain to take this with a grain of salt. Take this feedback with a grain of salt before just sponging it in and taking it on.
Love it. I was giggling because I'm just like, oh yeah, the glass wall is typically a common one I hear as well. That it's just like, I don't have to soak up every little thing that is being said to me, but I can hear it. And then, be able to discern what is working for me, what is not, what do I need to actually, do with it at all, if anything. Right. And just be able to let that sit there for a second without truly like soaking it up, like you're saying, and ruminating on it. So love those beautiful things. And yes, you have quite a few different techniques in the book that you also share as well.
Yes. One other method I share with people, you were talking about approaching feedback more objectively. And another way to do that, I call it feedback parsing, which needs a better name than that. But sitting down, literally taking a piece of paper and splitting it into 4 columns. First column is exactly what was said, not your interpretation, not your story about what was said. It is the words that came out of that person's mouth or that was in the email or whatever it is. Second column is all of your grievances with what was said. Vent whatever they got wrong, blind spots, all of that goes in that second column. Third column is what might be right with the feedback. Where there might be a kernel of truth or an area for you to improve or pay attention to. And then the last column, the fourth column, is what do you do next? What's your constructive action? Is there a conversation you need to have, a step you need to add to your process? Or are you going to choose to let it go and disconnect from the situation?
Mm-hmm.
But this is very helpful to process through feedback in a more balanced way, since HSPs, as sensitive strivers, we're going to be thinking anyway. We
Mm-hmm.
may as well channel that energy constructively into a structured process
Mm-hmm.
rather than just letting our minds run wild and exhausting ourselves.
Yep. I love that. That is so beautiful. And I call it those concrete processes. It's like, instead of, like letting it swirl around up in your head, get the paper out, write some of this stuff down. And all of a sudden your brain can actually see like, oh, hey, look at that. I don't have to keep going over and over in your head. It's like, yeah, no, you don't. I got it. Thank you.
Exactly.
Yeah. One thing I was going to say is, one thing that I've talked about with some of my clients too, that if I get caught up in that kind of ruminating piece, then, because I've heard something and it really hit me in the heart or something, it's like, all right, I'm going to give myself a certain time limit, and maybe it's for the whole day. Like, I'm just going to allow myself to feel whatever it is I feel about this very specific thing that occurred.
Yes.
And then that's it. It's like, you don't get to take over 2 days, 3 days, 4 days a week, because again, it's like, it's making my story bigger in my head than the reality of it.
Yes. I was actually just looking at some research, because I do that in my free time, that shows that the emotions of shame and humiliation, two common emotions that come with feedback, last only about 30 to 50 minutes. So if you can set a timer, and when that timer goes off, time box your feelings. So as you were saying, it doesn't just bleed over into everything that you do. That is a really wonderful way to concretize, like you were saying, make that boundary very tangible while building that internal discipline of just not letting these things take over.
Yeah. And I know you've talked about it as well in the work that you do, that resiliency piece. When you recognize it's like, hey, I actually can manage my emotions and be more in balance versus being reactive to everything. And we know that's part of emotional intelligence as well. That's recognizing it's like, look at your strengths more so than being the sensitive striver, but the resiliency you're building with yourself. That's where that self-compassion piece comes in. That's where it's like, yeah, I can do these things and bounce back from that versus, letting it just soak up and take everything over for me. Love it.
Absolutely.
All right, my dear, I'm curious. Is there anything, as we've been talking about this, I know there's like 50,000 different directions I could go in our conversation, but I want to make sure, is there anything in particular that you really wanted to share about your book that I didn't ask about, that I didn't cover, that is just, something that has really helped so many of the clients that you've worked with that I've missed asking?
Yeah, one hack from the book that is probably my favorite, that has served a lot of people, is the idea of naming your inner critic, of personifying it, making it something that is separate from you. Since as sensitive strivers, we have very strong inner critics, right? We expect the best from ourselves. Anything less is not acceptable. We are constantly striving. That's where that comes from. And so you didn't do enough. You're not good enough. Everyone else is better than you. Very strong. So this idea of naming your inner critic, mine is named Bozo, like Bozo the clown. Yours, I have another client whose is Darth Vader, and they got a Darth Vader action figure that they keep on their desk.
Beautiful.
I have had other clients name theirs the little monster. The point here is to make it something that is separate from you, so you are not so fused. You don't automatically buy into the narrative, and you're able just to have that moment of pause where you can make a better choice.
Love it. And it is, I just sitting here giggling because, same thing that I do with my clients as well. And it's so powerful, because when people say, oh, I'm just, I'm really hard on myself and I'm this, and it is that over-identifying. It's that fusing like you talked about. And it's like, no, that's a part of you, but it's not all of you. So, I can just see that Darth Vader action figure sitting on the desk like, my lightsaber's bigger. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. That's perfect. I love that.
Love it. Well, I'm curious for you, Melody, who has been part of the inspiration? I know, again, this book itself has been a labor of love for you, and it's been something you've been synthesizing over the last few years as well. Who has been part of this inspiration for you, whether it's been writing this book or over the last couple years, especially with everything going on, the pandemic and all the stuff I know you've been supporting people with regarding changes in the jobs and the stress levels and working from home and all that? Who has been part of your inspiration through all of this?
I look to women like Dr. Elaine Aron, Susan Cain, who, of course, Dr. Aron, her research is so fundamental to everything I draw on in the book. And I'm incredibly grateful that she endorsed the book as well. But I really look to her because she has taken such a scientific, research-based approach to defining sensitivity, to disseminating research about it, to combat some of that stigma around it. And so I am really indebted to her. And I also look to Susan Cain, who has done something similar with introversion, taking something that we disregard or dislike about ourselves and really positioning it as a superpower. And so they are definitely two of my role models, and incredibly grateful that both of them endorsed and supported the book.
Yeah, when you had shared, like, the release of your book, and I was reading through those endorsements, I'm like, oh my gosh, how cool is that?
Fangirl moment.
Yes, seriously.
For sure. Yes.
Love it. And it is. They're two such incredible women that it is breaking down these barriers. Like, somehow there is a deficit, whether you're highly sensitive or, there's the preference of introversion. It's like those are truly strengths, and it's part of who you are. None of those are disorders, and none of those are somehow wrong. It's like these are part of your traits that make you you.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
Embrace it. And truly helping the workforce understand you don't need to be loud and pushy in order to be successful, to create such incredible companies and make changes in this world. There are both ways of being, that each thing has its place and space for it, and that our differences really do make up a beautiful well-roundedness, versus one-sidedness. Love it.
Yes. I was just going to add that I was recently looking at a report from the World Economic Forum, and they were looking at what are the skills that are going to be most valuable in 2025 in the workspace and the future of jobs. And it's all skills that sensitive strivers and HSPs in general exemplify. Things like critical thinking, problem solving, self-management, working with people, communication. All of those aspects nothing can replace that. Nothing can replace these cognitive and emotional superpowers that we have. We just have to get out of our own way to embrace them.
Yes, very true. And I know that, there's talk about the artificial intelligence going to take over and things like that. And it's like, yeah, there's a place for a certain level of it, but they really cannot replace all humans and everything that we bring to the workplace and to this world. So yeah, love it. Well, ladies, if you want to find out more about this book, Trust Yourself, Melody has on her website, it's called melodywilding.com/chapter, and you can get a chapter of her book. Again, her website has that on there as well, and I'll have that in the show notes. You can also connect with Melody over Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and she's got a Facebook group called The Haven Community. And again, all of these resources will be in the show notes. And I just want to say again, Melody, thank you so much for coming back to the show. Thank you so much for writing the book that you did and putting it out into the world. I think it's a great resource for all of our sensitive striver listeners out there. And I think they will find so much value packed into this book, and really, again, leveling up themselves as they go through the exercises that you have in the book.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. It is my pleasure, and I am so grateful for you, your support, and your friendship. It means a lot.
Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, I invite you to go out to iTunes and please leave an honest rating and review. In the podcast world, this really helps other women find the podcast, and they can see if it resonates with others out there. appreciate all your support and leaving me a rating.